Hi, everybody. Welcome to the gathering. I'm David Ault. As I've been scanning over the experiences of this past week and looking at the themes that rise to the surface in discussions and with clients and just life in general, one thing has continued to surface, and that is the examination and the application of self love. And one of the things that can be really frustrating about something that feels so general is to bring meaning to it. And not just bring meaning to it from conceptual ideas, but to excavate and kind of find something that's going to stir in the hearts of the people that we're all communing together with, that we bond in this commitment to apply such things as self love, understanding that everything interfaces with that. The degree by which I love and I cherish and honor and respect my own being is the degree by which I am met with respect and with being seen and valued and heard. And there is a responsibility, there is a reciprocal action that goes with all of this. So you would think that that would be something that we would readily hop on the bandwagon and do. But I find that it's an interesting part of being human is to be in the density of the human experience and forget all of that. In fact, it sort of takes a back seat. And I saw the perfection of this topic as I began to get sick yesterday and have not felt well even this morning and today, which requires a sort of stillness and a reevaluation of all the human things that we do. And in that reevaluation is once again noticing the talk, the thoughts that happen. Speak for myself within my mind of you need to do this and this is inconvenient and you need to hurry and hustle and get through. And so there's just so much bombardment of things that are diametrically opposed to anything that is self-love. And yet I'm approaching it differently. Let me explain. So last night, my partner and we don't watch much television, but we've been sort of captivated by a series on Apple TV called Ted Lasso, and we are in the second season. And it's interesting to watch the investment that we have in these characters. I can really appreciate the writing of this series. I see so many different archetypes. I see the goodness of humanity, but I also see how the wounding and the unaddressed wounding that sits within us, the thing that kind of covers this idea of self-love, really, really plays itself out in very sad and harmful ways. And so we watched a couple of episodes last night, and we're trying to space them out. And then when we were over, because I wasn't feeling well, we were kind of just laying there, and I had this feeling of I'm just so tired, not wanting to do anything, not being motivated. And it was more than just from being ill. It felt something more ancient and more deep, just a weariness, a bone weariness that was coming up. And yet this time, what I began to do is all of the stuff that I've been teaching lately, and that is to just witness those thoughts. What a distinction between witnessing the thought and identifying with the thought. And I'm going to say that again because it's such a pivotal part of the self-love journey. It's one of the pivotal lessons in so much of the literature and the things that we've been reading and discussing and studying. And yet it needs to be said over and over and over again because it's the thing that I was referring to earlier about what will it take to burn inside of us to become a champion witnesser more than something that continues to identify with every single thought, because that promotes the weariness. And I realized I had work to do, and I realized that it was coming up. And I do believe this, that things come up and we notice them or we are conscious of them when there is something equally ready to work with that, to dissolve that, to transcend that. It isn't that these things come up and we are helpless. It's that there's some kind of divine timing that as I notice an issue, I get to trust the fact that the things that are going to help that issue become less toxic are also readily available. That to me is just, again, a part of the divine design, of the compassionate nature of source and divine energy. And so when this was coming up for me, I really wanted to practice. I wanted to practice noticing, witnessing those thoughts rather than identifying them. And here are some of the things that are critical with regards to each of us being more of that which is the witness rather than the one that is continually identifying these thoughts as if there's something personal to them. And this inspiration comes from Matt Kahn, which was a part of a discussion of a weekly study group that I've been leading. And so things like fear, things like sadness, anger, I was feeling all of that. And he wrote in a book that was very well received called Whatever Arises, Love That. Whatever arises, love that. And he's talking about something that he's calling the art of self-compliment. And he said it's natural, when it's natural, to respond to fear by focusing on how to get away from it. You may not realize that any attempt to pull away from emotions only sends another message of abandonment to your heart. Did you hear that? He's saying instinctually when something fearful comes and all we want to do is run away or busy ourselves or medicate ourselves or distract ourselves, that what we're doing is we're sending a message to our heart that once again we are abandoning ourselves. We're abandoning the natural response of fear, the feeling and the emotion there, rather than turning to it and being in relationship with the fear and wanting to know, where do you come from? How can I nurture you? And when you think that all of life is relational, this makes sense. Self-love then is not stigmatizing anything within the range of feeling and emotion, but being willing to see all of it as a gift, as barometers, as guideposts in order to help us emotionally, to help us spiritually, to help us psychologically, in order to be aware of the many gifts and tools that we have to navigate being human. What a beautiful thing to have a full range of emotion. And yet we've labeled some of them as good and some of them as bad, and we stigmatize them. He said, so when it's natural to respond to fear by focusing on how to get away from it, we're actually sending a message to our heart that says, I'm going to abandon you again. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to self-love. I'm going to self-run. He also said, maybe when you feel sadness, you've wondered, how do I cure myself of sadness? How do I overcome it? You thought about, how do I overcome sadness? So much a part of our self-talk these days. And he's saying such questions can leave you feeling quite defeated until you realize that sadness wasn't created to be overcome. To overcome sadness is to push away your innocence until it begins to act more appropriately. And then who determines what is appropriate? Do you see the domestication here? Is that when we have been taught that certain things are acceptable, to overcome the sadness means that we're not accepting what we are feeling. And so when you couple Matt Kahn's beautiful instructions with this idea of being the witness of the feeling and the thought, it is truly one of the most grace-filled mentor type relationships that we can have with self. Think about that. We become our own mentor, we become our own guru with regards to what is needed to return back to love. So, love has no judgment. Self love has no judgment of self. And yet, here we are, crippled in our world with such layer upon layer upon layer, history upon history, decade upon decade of things that are diametrically opposed to self-love, self-criticism. And so when I noticed these thoughts, when I noticed not feeling well, when I noticed the way in which I wasn't giving my permission to make it okay to even feel this, I instantly in that moment, one of the first times that I moved into witness consciousness almost immediately. It was great. I thought, look at me practicing what I preach. I'm not going to try to fix this feeling. We laid there, we turned the television off, and we sort of laid there and we talked about it a little bit, but neither of us took it upon as a mission to fix it. It was simply to speak it, notice it, and then to witness it. And in the witnessing, allow the wisdom of its rising up to do what it needs to do to move us into some transcendent understanding. Beautiful thing. And I know that it sounds, again, here's the frustrating part. It's like trying to teach you auto mechanics from a classroom rather than hovering over the hood of the car and looking at these things and getting our hands in there and working with all of the tools to make it a reality. And I long to continue to want to be open to how can you and I practice more the beauty, the honoring of everything that is within us and to become more of the witness rather than the identifier who wants to condemn. It reminds me so much of the 13th century poet Rumi, one of my favorite poems. It was called The Guest House. Now, I want you to listen to this. And yes, I'm sure there's been all kinds of different nuanced translations from the original Persian language. But I want you to get the gist of what Rumi is writing. And I want you to think of how many centuries long ago this was and to see how nothing has changed. Nothing has changed with regards to the invitation to be more of the witness, to not run from things, but to turn to things, to turn to it. And in the turning to, the thing that heals and elevates all things is love. And love must come from us. And in order for love to have any authenticity, we must love us. If we're going to be the channel for love, by loving ourselves, we free ourselves from the agenda to use love as a masking in order to get something, but to just love freely. And so it's as if Rumi knew this as well and was encouraging those people around him to do the same. And he called it the guest house. And he said, this being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes to an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Greet them all at the door. Each has been sent. Each of the things that we experience that we have become so used to wanting to run away, to ignore, to just meet them in witness consciousness, to want to be able to be in relational energy, to even talk to them and say, what is it that you want me to know? Isn't that fascinating? So as I talk to my body, or as I talk to the feeling of fatigue, as I talk to the sadness that was coming up, I realized that part of what I was experiencing and what my body was experiencing was the sadness that I felt for these characters in this television series. Knowing that, again, they're fictional characters, but in some way they're representation of so much of what walks around in the form of being human in the world. The wounding, the goodness, the wounding, the seeming clash of all of that. And the way in which we compartmentalize and try to move away from the wounding and only look at the thing that is easy or delightful. And I believe that sometimes messaging, spiritual messaging, can get convoluted a little bit with regards to turning away from things. We often say turn away from conditions. And I've been advocating for a while to not turn away from condition, to turn to the condition and let the condition create within my own mind this idea that not everything is as it seems. It's the only way that I can make sense and bring integrity to the statement that God is all that there is. If God is all that there is, what are some other ways to say that? If God is all that there is, if we live in a divine design, if the universe in and of itself, the quantum field of the all, is perfection, then it means that everything that I'm trying to turn away from is also perfection. It means that turning away from myself, self-condemnation, I'm condemning something that's perfect. And so to structure these types of principles or listening to them from the idea that you can only look at certain things, I think is doing more harm than good. And I think that we quantum leap in our awareness when we become available and have the cultivated ability to turn to the things that scare us, to turn to the things that are uncomfortable. Oftentimes, that's where reconciliation happens. Oftentimes, that's where forgiveness comes into play. Because often, if we don't turn to those things and make space for it, then things don't get spoken, things continue to get buried, and so on and so on. And so, this idea, this practice of fear nothing and turn to everything, and to see all things as holy, everything is holy, is both conceptual and getting our hands dirty under the hood of the car. And I'm wondering what would inspire you to want to do that this week. I wonder what it might be that you've put on a back burner and you're just not willing to address it. And what would it be like to bring it to the front burner and to cast a light on it and to speak from it as if it is a wisdom keeper, a gatekeeper that is essential for the evolution of our growth. Now, something I want to add to this that, again, seems to be a stumbling block is to do this with thoughts, but also to do this with people, isn't necessarily meaning that those who inflict harm upon us, that we are in their physical proximity. But if you can look at the people who are, quote, quote, the biggest perpetrators of our grief, and you can look at them through the lens of consciousness, and you can begin to see and consider them as some type of wisdom keeper, some type of gatekeeper who is essential, just as Rumi said, for our growth. Welcome them all. We're not welcoming them into our physical presence and into our home to continue to be exposed to something that's unloving, but we can begin to create this transfiguration within our mind, within the field of consciousness and self-awareness, where we can begin to cultivate the practice of witnessing all things as perfect. Think about how holy that work is. Think about how majestic it would be if every single day the agreement was everything that I see, everything that I witness is holy. And then you and I figure out how we're in physical proximity with that. You and I figure out how we respond to that. Because you see, if something is harming us, if someone is speaking harm to us or doing harm to us, that's one thing on the physical plane, this singular physical experience, to do what is wise and to distance ourselves from that. But I want you to see it also from a dual opportunity to do the work mentally. And that's where our country is. That's where our world is right now. There has just been such an onslaught, an avalanche of division, because this type of work just seems to be ridiculous or something that is laughable. And yet, love is the only answer. We're trying to find the answer in so many different ways, but when we go to every divine instruction that has ever been given to us, we are reminded over and over again that the answer is love. So how can I bring love to the situation? Well, I'm going to go back to what I shared in the beginning, and that is you must start with yourself. You and I, each of us, have just a tremendous call to cultivate a remarkable practice of loving the self, far beyond just self-care with a small s, which is kind of doing things to the physical body, but capital S self-care, capital S self-care, which is allowing ourselves to be curious as to why we repeat patterns. Returning to this idea of the principle that God is all that there is, and holding that principle and then inviting that principle in to influence us in the way in which we see things. That's a part of self-care, capital S. And then understanding the rhythm of life through the ebbs and flows. That principle is unchanging. And if I'm going to practice self-care, it means that I get to understand and to know that even in the apparent absence of, when something in the rhythm of life seems to be all in ebb, that there is simultaneously a flow. And part of my self-care with a capital S is to work on my curiosity, to work in my relationship with that principle, and to work with this idea of rhythm, to bring about a secured place of trust. So whether I'm feeling bad, whether I'm noticing thoughts of fatigue and helplessness, all of these things, I can witness them, but I can bring to them all of the other things that I know to be true. And in doing that, I let love, I let self-love continue to motivate, to cleanse, to give birth to, and to set straight all it is that is our mission in our life, in our call. And so what will help you? What will help you this week to begin to practice being more in the witness program, the witness of everything without judgment. Practice it. Practice it today. Bring it in as a part of your intention and begin to see the softening and the self-compassion that is readily available for all of us. Blessings.